Brice's phone buzzed on a kitchen counter. The screen's glow cutting through the dim morning light like a blade. A single text from his wife, Claire, stared back at him, each word a shard of ice. "I'm sorry, Brice. I want a divorce. I'll explain when I'm back from the conference." His coffee mug slipped from his hand, shattering on the tile, as the life he'd built over 15 years cracked open, exposing a truth he wasn't ready to face. The small town of Willow Creek was waking up, its streets lined with maples shedding their last golden leaves. Brice stood at the edge of his backyard, the morning air crisp with the scent of damp earth and pine. At 42, he was a man of routine, his broad frame softened by years of desk work, his dark hair threaded with silver. His hands, calloused from weekend woodworking, gripped a rake as he cleared leaves from the lawn, each motion a quiet ritual. This was his sanctuary, a modest 2-story house, a garden he'd tended with care, a life he'd built with Claire. Inside, the kitchen was warm, the hum of the coffee maker familiar comfort. Brice poured a mug, the steam curling upward as he glanced at the photo on the fridge. Him and Claire, laughing on a beach in Maine, her blonde hair tangled by the wind, his arm around her waist. That was 10 years ago, when their marriage was a symphony of shared dreams, her ambition as a financial consultant, his steady work as a high school history teacher. They'd planned for a future, travel, a cabin by a lake, maybe a child one day. But lately, those plans felt like echoes, drowned out by Claire's long hours and distant silences. Brice sipped his coffee, his hazel eyes drifting to the calendar on the wall. Claire was in Chicago, attending a financial conference, her 3rd trip this year. She left 3 days ago, her suitcase packed with precision, her smile brief as she kissed him goodbye. "Big opportunity," she'd said, her voice bright but clipped. "Could be a game changer." Brice had nodded, proud of her drive, though a quiet unease had settled in his chest. Her trips were more frequent now, her calls shorter, her laughter rarer. He shook off the thought, setting the mug down. Claire was his anchor, the woman who'd stayed up with him grading papers, who'd danced with him in the kitchen to old jazz records. If something was wrong, she'd tell him. Trust was the bedrock of their marriage, or so he believed. He pulled on his jacket and headed to Willow Creek High, where his students were a welcome distraction. Teaching history was his passion, bringing the past to life, showing kids how choices shape the world. His classroom, with its maps and faded textbooks, was a second home. "Mr. Larson, you think people ever really change?" one student, Ellie, asked during a discussion on the American Revolution. Her question caught Brice off guard, her earnest eyes mirroring his own introspection. "Sometimes," he said, his voice thoughtful, "but it takes something big, a crisis, a truth they can't ignore." Ellie nodded, and Brice felt a pang, as if the words were for him. He pushed it aside, focusing on the lesson, but the question lingered, a seed planted in fertile ground. After school, Brice met his friend Tom, a math teacher and fellow woodworking enthusiast, at the local diner. The place smelled of fried onions and fresh pie, its red vinyl booths warm but comforting. Tom, a wiry man with a quick laugh, slid into the booth across from him. "You look like you're carrying the world, Brice," he said, his eyes narrowing. "Claire's trip stressing you out?" Brice forced a smile, stirring his coffee. "Just the usual. She's killing it, as always." He didn't mention the unease, the way Claire's texts were brief, almost perfunctory. Tom didn't push, but his concern was a quiet warmth, a reminder that Brice wasn't alone. They talked shop, lesson plans, a new bookshelf project, until the diner's neon sign flickered on, signaling dusk. Back home, Brice settled into the living room, the old leather couch creaking under his weight. He opened his laptop to check emails, a habit-born routine. A notification from their bank caught his eye, a low balance alert for their savings account. Frowning, he logged in, expecting a glitch. The account, meant for emergencies, showed a balance of $12.43. His heart stuttered. Last month, it had held $8,000. He checked their retirement accounts next, his fingers trembling. The 401k and IRA, painstakingly built over years, were nearly empty. Transfers dated 2 days ago, amounts he couldn't fathom, all initiated by Claire. The room spun, the laptop's glow a harsh spotlight. Brice's breath came in shallow bursts as he stared at the numbers, willing them to change. This wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate, a violation so profound it felt like a physical blow. Claire, his partner, his confidant, had taken everything they'd saved, everything they'd dreamed of, and she was gone at a conference, unreachable except for a text he hadn't yet received. He grabbed his phone, his thumb hovering over her name. He wanted to call, to demand answers, but something stopped him. The low balance alert was a warning, a crack in the facade of their life. He needed to understand before he acted. Instead, he texted Tom. "Something's up with Claire. Can we talk tomorrow?" Tom's reply was instant. "Anytime, man." "You okay?" Brice didn't respond, his mind racing. He stood, pacing the living room, the photo on the fridge now a taunt. Claire's smile, once a beacon, felt like a mask. He thought of her recent trips, her distracted glances, the way she'd pull away from his touch. Had there been signs he'd missed? The way of the unknown pressed against him. A mix of hope. She'd explained. It was a misunderstanding, and dread that the truth was worse than he could imagine. As the clock ticked toward midnight, Brice sat on the couch, the house too quiet, its familiar creaks now ominous. He opened his phone, scrolling through Claire's recent texts. "Conference is intense. Talk soon. Miss you." The words felt hollow, a script she'd recited. He checked her social media, finding polished posts about the conference, but nothing personal, nothing that felt like her. The absence was a clue, a thread he'd pull when she returned. The night stretched on, and Brice's hope flickered, a candle in a growing storm. He didn't know what Claire had done or why, but the emptied accounts were a betrayal that changed everything. He closed his eyes, the coffee mug shadow replaying in his mind. Tomorrow, he'd start searching for answers, but tonight, he let the silence hold him, a man on the edge of a truth that would redefine his world. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen blinds, casting slanted shadows across the shards of Brice's broken coffee mug, still scattered on the tile where it had fallen. He stood motionless, his phone clutched in his hand, Claire's text message burning into his vision. "I'm sorry, Brice. I want a divorce. I'll explain when I'm back from the conference." The words were a sledgehammer, each syllable cracking the foundation of their 15-year marriage. Brice's heart thudded, a frantic rhythm against the silence of the house, as shock gave way to a raw, disorienting grief. He sank into a chair, his broad frame slumping, the air heavy with the scent of stale coffee and betrayal. At 42, Brice had prided himself on stability, his teaching job, their cozy Willow Creek home, the life he and Claire had woven together. But the text, sent at 6:03 a.m., was a guillotine, severing that life in a single stroke. His mind raced, replaying her departure 3 days ago. Claire's quick smile, her suitcase zipped tight, her promise of a game-changing conference in Chicago. Had it all been a lie? The question gnawed at him, a splinter he couldn't extract. Brice's first instinct was to call her, to demand answers, but his fingers froze over the screen. The low balance alert from their bank, discovered last night, loomed larger now. $12.43 in their savings, their retirement accounts gutted, transfers initiated by Claire. The coincidence of the text and the theft was too stark to ignore. His chest tightened, a cocktail of disbelief and dread. Claire, his partner, the woman who'd laughed with him over late-night grading sessions, had taken everything, their savings, their future, and now their marriage. He stood, pacing the kitchen, the broken mug crunching under his boots. Hope flickered, fragile but stubborn. She'd explain. It was a mistake, a hack, anything but betrayal. He opened his laptop, logging into their bank again, praying the numbers had changed. They hadn't. The 401k, the IRA, painstakingly built over years, showed withdrawals totaling $237,000, wired to an account he didn't recognize. His breath hitched, the reality sinking in like cold water. This wasn't an error. It was deliberate, a plan executed while he slept, trusting her. The shock ebbed, replaced by a surge of anger. Brice grabbed his phone, dialing Claire's number. It went to voicemail, her cheerful greeting a mockery. "This is Claire, leave a message." He hung up, his hands trembling, and tried again. Same result. He texted instead. "What's going on? Call me. Now." The message sat undelivered, a gray bubble in a sea of blue. His anger faltered, giving way to a hollow ache. Was she avoiding him, or was something wrong? The uncertainty was a vice, squeezing his hope into doubt. Brice's suspicions grew, fed by the silence. He opened his laptop again, this time checking Claire's email, a shared account they used for bills. His guilt at invading her privacy was fleeting, drowned by the need for answers. Most messages were work-related, conference schedules, client follow-ups, but one, buried in a folder labeled miscellaneous, stopped him cold. It was from a travel agency, confirming a one-way flight to Lisbon, Portugal, booked in Claire's name, dated tomorrow. No conference return flight, no mention of Chicago. His stomach dropped, the pieces clicking into place. She wasn't at a conference. She was leaving him, and she'd taken their future with her. The discovery was a gut punch, but Brice forced himself to stay calm, his teacher's discipline kicking in. He screenshot the email, saving it to a new folder labeled Evidence. His mind, trained to analyze historical events, began to map the present. The conference was a lie, the withdrawals a theft, the divorce text a final blow. But why? Claire's ambition had always been fierce, but this was calculated, cruel. He needed to know her motives, and he needed proof before she vanished. He called Tom, his friend and fellow teacher, his voice steady despite the chaos within. "I need to talk," he said, the words heavy. "Claire, something's wrong." Tom's reply was immediate. "Meet me at the diner in an hour. Whatever it is, we'll figure out." Brice hung up, grateful for Tom's unwavering support, a tether in the storm. At the diner, the smell of bacon and syrup was a faint comfort. Tom listened, his wiry frame tense, as Brice laid out the text, the empty accounts, the Lisbon flight. "Jesus, Brice," Tom said, his eyes wide. "You think she's running? With the money?" Brice nodded, his jaw tight. "I don't know why, but I'm going to find out. Before she leaves." Tom leaned forward, his voice low. "You need a lawyer, maybe a PI. I know a guy, ex-cop, does discreet work. Want me to call him?" Brice hesitated, the idea of hiring a private investigator feeling like a betrayal of his own trust in Claire. But trust was a luxury he could no longer afford. "Do it," he said, his voice firm. Tom nodded, pulling out his phone, and Brice felt a flicker of hope. A plan, however small, was forming. Back home, Brice dug deeper, his suspicion a lens sharpening every detail. He checked Claire's social media, finding curated posts about the conference, but the timestamps were off, predated to look recent. He searched her laptop, left open on the dining table, and found a hidden folder with bank statements for an account in her name only, linked to the Lisbon transfer. The betrayal deepened, each discovery a weight on his chest, but also fueled him. He wasn't just a victim. He was a man with questions, and he'd find answers. His phone buzzed, a new text from an unknown number. "Check her work email. Look for Vanguard." Brice's pulse quickened. The message was anonymous, like a whisper from someone watching Claire's unraveling. He didn't know who it was, a colleague or rival, but the tip was a lifeline. He logged into her work email, searching for Vanguard. A single email appeared from a client named Vanguard Consulting, discussing a new venture in Portugal with Claire as the lead. The date was 6 months ago, before her trips began. Brice leaned back, the room spinning. Claire hadn't just left him. She'd planned it, building a new life while he tended their old one. The shock was a wave, but beneath it, a current of resolve grew. He saved the email, his plan taking shape. Find her, confront her, uncover the truth before she vanished. The diner's warmth, Tom's support, the anonymous tip, they were sparks in the dark, guiding him forward. Claire thought she'd outrun him. But Brice was waking up, and the truth was closer than she knew. The Willow Creek library was a quiet refuge, its stacks smelling of aged paper and polished wood. But for Brice, it was a battlefield. He sat at a corner table, his laptop open, the glow casting harsh shadows across his face. 5 days had passed since Claire's text. "I'm sorry, Brice. I want a divorce," and the discovery that she'd emptied their retirement accounts. The anonymous tip about her work email had opened a door to her secrets, and Brice was now knee-deep in a truth that tore at his heart. His hazel eyes, once warm, were sharp with focus, his broad frame tense with the weight of betrayal. Brice's investigation, fueled by shock and a desperate need for answers, had become relentless. Tom's private investigator contact, a gruff ex-cop named Ray, had delivered a dossier that morning. Its contents a map of Claire's hidden life. The Lisbon flight wasn't a whim. She'd leased an apartment there, paid for with funds from the siphon accounts. The Vanguard Consulting email, dated 6 months ago, revealed her role in a new financial venture, a startup promising high returns but shrouded in secrecy. Ray's digging uncovered more. Claire had been meeting with a Vanguard executive, Marcus Tate, during her conference trips, their emails laced with familiarity that stung like a slap. Brice's hands trembled as he opened a photo Ray had included, a grainy shot of Claire and Marcus at a Chicago bar, her hand on his arm, her smile brighter than Brice had seen in years. The image was a dagger, slicing through the hope he'd clung to. This wasn't just about money or ambition. It was personal, a betrayal that went beyond their marriage vows. His chest ached, a raw mix of grief and rage, as he pictured the woman he'd loved, her blonde hair catching the main sunlight, her laughter in their kitchen. Choosing another man, another life. The emotional intensity was overwhelming. Brice leaned back, rubbing his temples, his mind a storm of questions. Why hadn't she talked to him? Was their life, his steady teaching job, their cozy home, their shared dreams so unbearable? He thought of the nights they'd planned their future, her head on his shoulder, promising a cabin by a lake. Had it all been a lie, or had she changed, pulled away by Marcus's promises and her own restless ambition? The uncertainty was a wound, but it also drove him to dig deeper. Ray's report included a bombshell. The Vanguard venture was a shell, a Ponzi-like scheme funneling investor money into offshore accounts. Claire wasn't just a participant. She was a key player, using her financial expertise to mask the fraud. The retirement funds, $237,000, their life savings, were now tangled in this web, likely unrecoverable. Brice's stomach churned, the betrayal doubling. She'd stolen their future and tied it to a criminal enterprise. His love for her, still flickering, battled a growing fury. How could she do this to him, to them? He needed to confront her, to hear her reasons, but Claire was still in Chicago, her phone off, her text silent. Ray had tracked her to a hotel, not the conference venue, confirming she'd lied about her whereabouts. Brice booked a flight for that evening, his decision impulsive but resolute. He couldn't wait for her to return. The truth was too urgent, the pain too raw. He texted Tom, heading to Chicago. Need to see her. Keep this quiet. Tom's reply was swift. Be careful, Brice. Call if you need me. The flight was a blur, Brice's mind replaying memories. Claire's hand in his during a storm, her voice promising forever, as he grappled with the woman she'd become. At the hotel, a sleek downtown tower, he stood in the lobby, his heart pounding. Ray had provided her room number, and Brice rode the elevator. Each floor a step closer to a truth he both craved and dreaded. He knocked on her door, his breath shallow, the hallway's silence amplifying his pulse. Claire opened the door, her face paling as she saw him. She wore a silk blouse, her blonde hair loose, her eyes wide with shock. Brice, what are you doing here? Her voice was a mix of fear and defiance, a crack in her polished facade. "We need to talk," Brice said, his tone steady but laced with steel. He stepped inside, the room's sterile luxury a stark contrast to their warm Willow Creek home. A bottle of wine sat on the table. 2 glasses, one smudged with lipstick. The sight was a punch, but Brice held his ground. "I know about the money, Claire. The retirement accounts. Lisbon. Vanguard. Marcus." Her name on his lips was a wound, but he pressed on. "Why?" Claire's composure cracked, her hands twisting together. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice trembling. "I was going to tell you, I swear. I just needed a way out." Her eyes darted to the door as if expecting rescue, but Brice blocked her path, his presence unyielding. "A way out?" he repeated, his voice rising, the emotional intensity spilling over. "You stole our savings, Claire. Our future. You lied about the conference, about everything. Was it Marcus? Was he worth throwing us away?" His words were a raw plea, his love for her clashing with the betrayal. Tears welled in her eyes, but her jaw tightened. "You don't understand," she said, her voice sharp. "I was drowning, Brice. Your routines, your small-town life. It wasn't enough. Marcus offered a chance to build something bigger, to be someone. The money, it was for the venture. I didn't mean to hurt you." The confession was a blade, cutting through Brice's last shred of hope. Her ambition, her need for more, had outweighed their marriage. He stepped closer, his voice low, trembling with pain. "You didn't just hurt me, Claire. You erased us. What was I to you? A safety net you could burn." Her silence was answer enough, her tears a hollow apology. Brice turned to leave, his heart a wreckage, but paused at the door. "I'm not done," he said, his voice steady now, a promise. "You'll face this, Marcus, Vanguard, all of it." He walked out, the door clicking shut, her sobs fading behind him. The confrontation had gutted him, but also clarified his path. Claire's motivations, ambition, escape, a new life with Marcus, were laid bare, and Brice's grief was now laced with resolve. He'd uncover the rest, expose her schemes, and reclaim what he could himself. Back in his hotel room, Brice sat on the bed, the city's lights blurring through the window. The anonymous tipster's message, Ray's dossier, Claire's confession. They were pieces of a puzzle he was still assembling. The emotional connection to their shared past, nights by the fire, her laughter, made the betrayal cut deeper, but it also fueled him. He wasn't just a betrayed husband. He was a man waking up, ready to fight for the truth and the life he deserved. The Willow Creek sky was a bruise of gray, heavy with the promise of rain, as Brice sat on the back porch of his empty house. The garden he'd once tended with care, roses, lavender, a maple sapling he and Claire had planted, was overgrown, its neglect a mirror of his unraveling life. A week had passed since his confrontation with Claire in Chicago, her confession, "I was drowning, Brice. Your life was enough," echoing in his mind like a relentless tide. At 42, Brice was a man adrift, his trust shattered, his future a fog of uncertainty. The weight of her betrayal, the theft of their retirement savings, and the specter of Marcus Tate had broken something in him, leaving a void where love and hope had once lived. Brice's emotional breakdown came in waves, unpredictable and consuming. That first night back from Chicago, he'd sat in the living room, the silence of the house suffocating. The photo on the fridge, him and Claire on a Maine beach, her smile bright, had stared back, a cruel relic. He'd torn it down, the frame cracking as it hit the floor, and collapsed onto the couch, his broad frame shaking with sobs. The tears were raw, a release of 15 years of trust, of memories. Her hand in his during late-night walks, her laughter over burnt dinners, that now felt like lies. "How could you?" he'd whispered to the empty room, the question a plea with no answer. The loss of trust was a deeper wound. Claire wasn't just his wife. She'd been his partner, his confidant, the one who'd promised forever. Her ambition, her drive, had been part of what he loved, but it had morphed into something unrecognizable, fueled by Marcus and the fraudulent Vanguard venture. Brice questioned everything now. Every late night she blamed on work, every distracted glance, every promise of a shared future. Had she ever loved him? Or was he a stepping stone, a safe harbor she'd abandoned for a shinier shore? The uncertainty gnawed at him, eroding the man he'd been, a steady teacher, a hopeful husband, leaving a stranger in his place. Loneliness was a constant companion. The house, once alive with Claire's sketches and jazz records, was a tomb, its creaks and shadows amplifying his isolation. Brice avoided the bedroom, sleeping on the couch, unable to face the bed they'd shared. At Willow Creek High, his students noticed his distraction, missed assignments, curt replies, but he brushed off a concern with a forced smile. "Just a rough week," he'd say, the lie bitter on his tongue. His colleagues, sensing his withdrawal, gave him space, but the distance only deepened his solitude. Yet, in the wreckage, Brice's internal struggle was a battle between despair and defiance. He'd sit in his workshop, the scent of sawdust grounding him, and stare at the half-finished bookshelf he'd started for Claire. The wood, smooth under his calloused hands, was a reminder of who he'd been, a man who built things, who found order in chaos. But now, chaos reigned, and he questioned his worth. Was he too predictable, too rooted in Willow Creek's small-town rhythm? Claire's words, "Your life wasn't enough," haunted him, a mirror reflecting his fears of inadequacy. The audience would feel his pain in the quiet moments. Brice standing at the kitchen sink, staring at a mug she left behind, its chip a memory of a clumsy morning. Or walking the garden, pausing at the maple sapling, its fragile branches a symbol of a future stolen. These details tethered them to his grief, his loneliness a universal ache. Anyone who'd loved and lost could see themselves in his hollow gaze. Brice's efforts to regroup were tentative, born of necessity. Tom, his friend and fellow teacher, became his anchor, meeting him at the diner each evening. Over greasy burgers, Brice shared fragments of the truth. Claire's theft, Marcus, the Lisbon plan. Tom listened, his wiry frame tense, his voice steady. "You're not alone in this, Brice," he said, sliding a napkin with Ray's number. "The private investigator. Keep digging. You'll find your way." Tom's faith was a spark, and Brice clung to it, his resolve flickering back to life. Ray's updates were a lifeline. The PI had traced more Claire's movements. She returned to Willow Creek, staying at a motel, likely tying up loose ends before her Lisbon flight. Vanguard's scheme was unraveling, with investors demanding audits, Marcus under scrutiny. Brice pored over Ray's reports, his history teacher's mind analyzing patterns. The anonymous tipster sent another message. "She's meeting Marcus tomorrow, 7 p.m., Motel 6, Room 12. Be there." The tipster's identity, perhaps a Vanguard insider, remained a mystery, but their intel was gold. Brice saved it, his plan forming. Confront him again, expose the fraud, reclaim what he could. His emotional state was a tightrope walk. One night, alone in the workshop, Brice sanded the bookshelf, his hands shaking as memories flooded in. Claire's voice, "It's perfect, Brice," when he'd built her a desk. He dropped the sandpaper, his breath ragged, and punched the wall, the pain a fleeting release. But as the sting faded, he straightened, wiping his eyes. He couldn't let despair win. Claire had taken their money, their marriage, but she wouldn't take his strength. Brice called Mia, a counselor at school who'd offered support after noticing his strain. Over coffee, he shared enough. Claire's betrayal, the financial ruin, without bearing it all. Mia's calm voice was a balm. "You're still you, Brice," she said. "This doesn't define you. Build from here." Her words echoed Tom's, a chorus urging him forward. He began sketching a plan. Use Ray's evidence, the tipster's leads, to expose Vanguard's fraud, maybe recover some funds. The motel meeting was his chance to confront Claire and Marcus, to demand answers and set the stage for justice. As he stood in the garden, the first raindrops falling, Brice felt the loneliness shift, not gone but bearable. The sapling swayed, its roots holding firm despite the storm. He was like that tree, battered but standing, his trust broken but his will intact. The audience could connect with his struggle, the universal pain of losing love, the quiet courage of regrouping. Claire thought she left him behind, but Brice was rising, his plan a spark in the dark. Tomorrow, he'd face her, and the truth would light the way forward, whatever it cost. The Willow Creek Community Center buzzed with laughter and the clatter of folding tables, its walls adorned with student artwork and fairy lights. Brice stood at the edge of the room, a glass of cider in hand, watching his history students present their projects on local heroes. At 43, his broad frame was leaner now, his dark hair more silver than before, but his hazel eyes held a quiet strength, a light forged in the crucible of betrayal and resilience. 6 months had passed since Claire's text, "I want a divorce," and the discovery of her theft of their retirement savings. The confrontation with her and Marcus at the motel had been a reckoning, and tonight, Brice was a man reborn, standing on his own 2 feet, his new life a testament to his growth. The climax had been seismic. At the Motel 6, guided by the anonymous tipster, Brice had confronted Claire and Marcus, their faces pale as he laid out their fraud. Ray, the private investigator, had recorded it all. Claire stammered excuses, Marcus's arrogance crumbling as Brice revealed their Vanguard scheme, a Ponzi-like fraud now under federal scrutiny. Brice had sent Ray's dossier to the authorities, tipping off investors via an anonymous email. The fallout was swift. Vanguard collapsed, Marcus was indicted, and Claire, complicit, faced charges for embezzlement. The retirement funds were mostly gone, but Brice's evidence ensured legal consequences, a small justice that closed one chapter. The emotional toll had been heavy, but it was a catalyst for Brice's transformation. Claire's betrayal, her ambition twisted by Marcus's promises, her choice to flee to Lisbon, had shattered his trust, leaving him to question his worth. Yet, in the wreckage, Brice found lessons that reshaped him. He'd learned the danger of blind trust, the importance of listening to his instincts, and the strength in vulnerability. Claire's words, "Your life wasn't enough," had stung, but they'd also freed him, revealing a man capable of more than routine. He wasn't just a history teacher or a betrayed husband. He was a survivor, a builder of new dreams. Forgiveness was a slower journey, one the audience could feel in Brice's quiet moments. He didn't forgive Claire for her sake. She'd chosen her path, and the divorce, finalized months ago, was her consequence. But he forgave for himself to release the anger that had chained him. Late at night, in his workshop, sanding a new bookshelf, he'd think of their Maine beach trip, her laughter real then, and let it go. It wasn't absolution. It was freedom, a choice to not let her define him. Marcus, too, was a ghost, his indictment a distant victory Brice didn't dwell on. The anonymous tipster, likely a Vanguard whistleblower, never resurfaced, their role a spark he was grateful for. Brice's personal growth was evident in his new life. He'd moved into a small apartment, its walls bare but warm with possibility. The Willow Creek house, sold to cover legal fees, was a memory, but Brice kept the maple sapling, replanting it in a community garden he designed. Teaching remained his anchor, but he'd taken on a new role, mentoring at-risk students, his patience and empathy deepened by his own struggles. His classroom was alive again, his lessons infused with a passion that inspired his students, like Ellie, who'd asked, "Do people ever change?" Brice's answer now was a smile. They can, if they choose to. His community grew stronger, a lifeline that grounded him. Tom, his friend, was a constant, their diner talks evolving from crisis to camaraderie. Mia, the school counselor, became a close ally, her coffee dates a space for Brice to reflect. He'd even joined a woodworking co-op, his shelves and tables now sold at local markets, a side hustle that sparked joy. These connections, small but vital, showed the audience a man rebuilding, not in isolation, but in community, his loneliness replaced by bonds forged in authenticity. Brice's hopes for the future were humble but bright. He dreamed of travel, not the grand tours he planned with Claire, but solo trips to quiet places, Maybe a coastal town to sketch and write. He wanted to keep teaching, to see his students grow, to plant more gardens that outlived him. Love wasn't on the horizon. Not yet, but he was open to it, a possibility he hadn't closed off. The sapling in the community garden was his metaphor, fragile but rooted, thriving despite storms. At the community center, Brice watched Ellie present her project, her voice steady as she spoke of a local firefighter's courage. He clapped, his chest swelling with pride, a teacher's quiet victory. Mia joined him, her smile warm. "You're different, Brice," she said, her eyes searching his. "Stronger." He nodded, the words a mirror to his truth. "Had to lose a lot to find that," he said, his voice soft but sure. Later, he stepped outside, the night air crisp, the stars sharp above. The community center's lights glowed behind him, a beacon of his new beginning. Brice thought of the lessons etched into him. Trust must be earned, resilience is built in the dark, and forgiveness is a gift to oneself. Claire's betrayal had been a vault, hollowing him out, but he'd filled it with something new. Purpose, connection, a life he'd chosen. He walked to the community garden, the sapling silhouette faint in the moonlight. Kneeling, he touched its trunk, its bark rough under his fingers. "Keep growing," he whispered, the words a vow to the tree and himself. The audience could feel his transformation, a man who'd faced ruin and emerged not broken, but whole. Brice's story wasn't one of triumph over Claire or Marcus, but over despair, a quiet victory that inspired hope. As he stood, the wind carried the scent of earth and possibility. Brice's future was uncertain, but it was his, built on the roots of his resilience. He turned back to the center, the laughter spilling out, and walked toward it, his step steady, his heart open. The hollow vault was behind him, and ahead lay a life he'd craft, one choice at a time, a testament to the man he'd become.